Tim, it's been quite a difficult few weeks for you after an early diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. I think back in May, you've finished some courses of chemo that started in June. Now, many of us in the UK have been praying for you. If I could be personal, how are you post chemo, and what can we pray for you?
Well, I can be pretty brief on that. The chemo is continuing. It depends on how you. Well, it depends on how you count a round of chemo. I'm getting it every other week. The three things. One is that the chemo itself isn't too debilitating. That the side effects aren't too hard. I mean, they are hard, but you can get a lot more done if it turns out that the chemo makes you sick for a few days and then you recover. And so far, that prayer is being answered. That is, I'm not, as you can see right now, I'm not debilitated unless you think I look a lot worse than I think that my wife does. So so that's actually going fairly well, and we're going to continue that. The second question is, it's early enough that we still actually don't know how effective the chemo is, and so we will find that out relatively soon. So you should be praying about that, of course, because there are various things you can do if the first chemo doesn't seem to be treating the cancer well. There's other chemos, there's other therapies, but you can pray that the first chemo actually works. And then thirdly, there's the family. That is to say, there's a certain sense in which I look like I'm the sufferer and they're the caregivers. But as you know, with a family, basically each of us is suffering very badly, and each of us is caregiving, including me. So to them and to my wife. So you pray. There's a tendency to pray about me and then maybe add the family on the side. But I mean, we're basically rising and falling together. So praying that the chemo is not debilitating, praying that the chemo is effective, or whatever therapy God ordains to be effective is effective. And then for my family, that's it.
Yeah, no, we will certainly continue to pray for you and the family in that regard. Tim, have there been any particular reflections you and Kathy in particular have had during this time since diagnosis and treatment?
Oh, of course. There's and you can actually see it in the Psalms. I mean, the place I think everyone should go all the time is the Psalms. I mean, it's the place that's where you learn how to process every single kind of human situation before God in prayer. And when you go to the Psalms, which of course we are at a time like this, it's intriguing that there's this remarkable balance between. It's basically the Psalm is, "Let this cup pass from me, nevertheless, not my will but thine be done." And there it is. Except the Psalms give you 150 versions of how you actually get your heart to be able to say that. That on the one hand, you do say, "From the ends of the earth I cry to you, O Lord, turn back all the things that are against me, give me, preserve my life." And so that's perfectly right to pray for, and pray for very, very fervently. And then there's all the other stuff that's at the very same time. You've got to be willing to say, "Your will is perfect and good. Please prepare me to receive it joyfully, whatever you give me. Give me there's a prayer by John Calvin that says, "Keep me in the lively remembrance of my future resurrection, because Jesus Christ lay down in death for me and rose for my justification." And so there's got to be this sense of being, "Thy will be done, and your will is good, and I'm ready for absolutely anything." At the same time, a very fervent willingness to really kind of cry to the heavens and say, this is what I'm pouring out my heart to you, please. James Boyce, who died of liver cancer, the last time he spoke to his congregation, he just did a call to worship, but people wrote it down, and you can probably find it on 10th Presbyterian Church's website. But one of the things he pointed out was, he says, "I've always taught you," he says, "that the will of God is perfect and good. And that means that if you could change God's will even by a day, it wouldn't be as good. John Newton said famously, everything is needful that he sends, nothing can be needful that he withholds. Everything is needful that he sends, nothing can be needful that he withholds. So that's the thing that you're praying, Lord, just drive that deep into my heart. And then you get up and you walk around the day and you're at peace. At the same time, the Psalms do encourage you to really, you might say, sue heaven.
Mm.
I mean, he actually does. I mean, they do actually essentially do that in the Psalms and us elsewhere. Old Dr. Lloyd Jones used to talk about suing God for revival and suing God for answers to prayer. So that's these two rails are really difficult to keep because there's a tendency to say, I got hope, maybe things are going to go well. And then on the other hand, or maybe I should just resign myself to whatever God wants. And I don't think it's good for my physical health to do only one. And the Psalms don't want me to do only one.
Okay. There's something wonderfully humanizing about the way God chooses to reveal himself to us and how he wants us to respond to him.
Yeah, that is you're right about that. Humanizing is a great word because it does seem to fit who I really am as just a human being. I actually have to have that kind of dependence, that certainty of the resurrection, that certainty of the goodness of God's will. I have to have an infallible hope in that. But at the same time, I've got a prayer-hearing God, and he's a father, and I'm his child, and he tells me that very often you have not because you ask not. And so, it fits my humanity, and it almost feels like if I shut one of those two things down, I'm shutting down part of my humanity. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you've been a great model in your writing and speaking not to do that. And we'll stay with you on this journey, Tim, as much as the Lord gives us the ability to do so. Tim, change the subject entirely. COVID-19, obviously. We have heard the word that these times are unprecedented. Certainly the ubiquity of that word is unprecedented, but it probably is going to be a time that we won't easily forget and could change us for months, if not years. As you've reflected on that, Tim, what do you think are some of the more permanent changes? And how should we, as Christians, as believers in our community, in our churches, our Christian unions, how can we effectively connect with some of the new emerging attitudes and views so that the gospel really speaks in a way that resonates?
Yeah. Oh boy, I'll ramble a little bit, but not too long because it's so difficult to predict. Richard, I was just reminded last night that one of the first reviewers of The Lord of the Rings in 1954. I forgot the guy's name now. Obviously British, but he said this is a book that very few adults will ever want to read more than once. And, so the predictions are very dangerous. I would say that, and of course I'm obviously isolated. I'm here in Manhattan, and I'm not out and about as much. And of course, as much as I love the UK and get there so often, I'm obviously not there. But so take it for what it's worth. It does feel that the virus, at least for sure in this country, and I think in your country too, is going to exacerbate economic inequality. That is, the people who are able to basically keep going, the stock market, they have stocks, they can work from home, they're flexible, they're doing fairly okay. Working class people, what we call blue collar people, are much in far greater difficulty. And so what it means, for example, from what I can tell, even here in the city, we have a lot of churches, they're evangelical churches, and the white collar churches, mainly the professional churches are, they certainly are there's certainly are impacts, and we're not even sure what they are exactly. When we all come back together again, will people have dispersed? Will giving be down? But they're relatively minor, because usually the number of virus infections in those churches are smaller. So here in the city, I mean, there was a 250 member Hispanic church in the Bronx that's part of our network that had 13 deaths from the virus, because these are folks that have to be out. They can't make any money unless they're out, and they have to be doing things. And of course, they've all lost their jobs. And therefore, what's going on is that you may say our working class churches are in far greater difficulty than our white collar churches. I mean, to me, that's a real obvious. It's a very obvious what has to happen. That the white collar churches have got to connect to those working class churches, and they just basically have to do what Paul says. You know, there's a place where Paul says, when they're in need, you need to give, and then maybe when you're in need, they'll need to give. That there be equality, and he actually cites the manna. He actually quotes, it's I guess 2 Corinthians 8. He actually quotes Exodus 16 about the manna, that at the end of the day, everybody had the same amount. And he's not talking about some kind of abstract equalizing, but Paul's just saying that when you've got something like this that's going to exacerbate the class differences and exacerbate the inequality, Christians with more have just got to dig down deeper and not think as much about themselves and about their investments and their savings.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that's a very, very, one thing I'm sure is going to happen here. And I think it's likely to happen over there too. When it comes to long-term cultural changes, all I see is this seems to be exacerbating the extremism that's happening. And social media goes along with it. It is unprecedented. I do think one of the problems with the virus, here's the second thing I'll say, Richard, and then I'll be done, I think. What the virus has done is driven us away from each other in face-to-face online. We're just living online. And as a result, basically we're not listening to other Christians or our ministers or other Christian teachers as much as we're finding, and of course the social media pushes certain people toward you. I mean, if I like to look across the different groups. For example, I would read the New York Times. It costs money. I would read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every single morning, and I would want to get both of their perspectives on the same stories, and they're radically different. They're far more different than they were 10 years ago. I mean, they're far further away. And
we've even picked that up over here.
Yeah, I mean, and so what's happening, of course, as soon as I click on something, if I ever click on something that was on Fox News, I'm besieged with. I am overwhelmed with other Fox News things being pushed to me on my phone and that sort of thing. So I do say that the polarization is getting worse, and Christians are basically, to a great degree, are taking their cues from secular sources, secular political sources that are telling them the things that make them feel better about their side. Yeah. And it's dangerous because maybe, look, over here, you're going to be you're going to be Labor or conservative, you're going to be Democrat or Republican. I do think Christians have got to decide where they're going to vote and that sort of thing. But but at the root of these parties is secularism. A secular version of conservatism is highly individualistic, more than the Bible. And a secular progressivism, of course, is much more, it reduces everything to power, and it's kind of morally relativistic. And when Christians are getting sucked into their political bubbles, and at the bottom of those political bubbles is secular thinking, I feel like we're basically giving up our biblical heritage. We're not thinking biblically anymore. So those are the two things I worry about: the polarization intellectually, and then the polarization economically. Yeah. And the first one is a lot easier for me to figure out what to do about. Okay. Yeah. That's my.
That's so helpful. One of the reflections I've just had, and I've been involved with a number of other Christian leaders in this number 10 think tank, and we've been told that churches, along with nightclubs, have been amongst the biggest spreaders of COVID. And I take that as a huge compliment, in as much as Christians love to linger, love to embrace, love to eat food, be all age, and et cetera, et cetera. And I suppose one worry I have is that we think that the face masks and the social distancing, that somehow, even once we've got a vaccine, that somehow that is virtuous. And so I do worry that we might not quite do church and fellowship in such an enthusiastic and warm way for some years to come. That's a background worry.
Yes, I could have said that. One of the things I don't know is how fast we're going to normalize.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good friends, by the way, with Francis Collins, who's the head of our National Institute of Health.
Saw your interview. It was very good.
He's a he's evangelical Christian, and very out there as an evangelical Christian. He worries that it depends on it. Basically, it depends on the when vaccines and various other things are available. It really depends quite a bit on whether people are willing to make use of those. And if people are afraid, which he can understand, he does see that it could be like 3 or 4 years in which you keep on having these new outbreaks, and then people get panicked, and it really might undermine all of our communities. And of course, the church's community, I mean, that's at the very heart of how we. I mean, I'm being a Presbyterian. I'm not an Anabaptist. Maybe I don't quite go over. Wouldn't say quite what my Anabaptist friends would say, but they would actually say community is the way you do everything. I mean, it's not the expository sermon. It's the community that by which people are actually getting the truth into them. If you're sitting there listening to the expository sermon, you listening, it's not going to get in there. It's not going to shake the heart unless you're talking about it with your friends, and you're talking about the sermon, and you're pointing these things out, and see. So the Anabaptists are partly right, and therefore anything that undermines that community is really dangerous. And Francis actually is concerned that we might be in this mode for a good while of just fear and not being able to really be part of each other's lives in the same way. Depends a lot on how people respond. And that it's hard for him to see. He can't see into his crystal ball on that sort of thing. So you're right to worry about that.
Tim, you have been incredibly generous with your time and your energy, both of which must be in short supply at the moment. God bless you. Thank you so much. Do send our love to your family, and hopefully see you before too long.
Thank you, Richard. I'd love to see you too.